The opening scene for Chapter 2 didn't originally exist during 2010 RP days. When Lewa wakes, flies to the fire region, and approaches the guards at entry gate, these sequences were never acted originally, meaning they're new concepts, and details like these were just skipped over during playtime since it was easier to assume all that happened and waste no time in acting more important scenes. We do try to keep some comedy in there, and originally Lewa's awkwardness wouldn't have been displayed between him and the guard if I wouldn't have made Flame a key character in the episode. It's been so long from whence this started that I can only guess how most of this episode went. My guess is that originally Flame was not a character in this episode, and Lewa simply went to this arena tournament after speaking with the anonymous jungle Agori, who I replaced with Flame. From there, my guess is that Lewa was directed to seeding by Miscellaneous Glatorian, and spoke with fellow fighters as he watched the first few battles take place in the arena ring. But what fun is that? Lewa needed a friend, a familiar face and supporting character to interact with him, which I do believe his character interacted with someone familiar at the arena in the original 2010 sequence. I just can't remember who. Therefore, slipped in a fitting character to take that place. Here's some fun trivia on episode 2. This episode was played on the following meetup not too long after first meetup at my house. Second episode took place at my friend's house during a weekend sleepover, and the scenes that follow of Fyra and Natasha battling were actual acted sequences played in her sister's former room, but by that time was being emptied, its contents already heading for boxes, ready for the big move. The battle scenes were acted on the big squishy bed I leaned on from the sidelines. We used a fancy chessboard, which looked kind of marbled, and pretended the board was the arena floor, the surrounding covers being the arena, and the walls being visualized via imagination. I took the characters needed and started acting them, agreeing to play the fight scene. I was still getting my friend used to ASLRP and acted out the characters myself to show her how it's done, hoping she would act Natasha while I acted Fyra. But instead my friend watched me from the sidelines, her eyes glittering with excitement as she watched me act. I tried getting her to play along, but instead she told me she didn't want to act the battle scene. She was having too much fun watching me play the characters. I figured she was being entertained by this and jokingly asked if she was having fun watching the show, but need I remind her she has a role in the story herself. To my surprise, she admits she was rather absorbed in watching me act, claiming I played the toys so well she could practically see the elements flashing back and forth in her head as I moved the figurines. I found this rather amusing, and went on with the battle scenes on my own, letting her watch till it was her turn to act Lewa. Both scenes of Fyra versus Natasha and Fiamma versus Ashton were actual played sequences that I spiced up later in writing. I'll also note that Fiamma was originally named Ira. That detail has been mentioned in description with her mock build and was a recent name change. In original play, there were only three fight scenes, all of them quick. The started one with Fyra, the second match with Fiamma, and the third match with Lewa. I added in extra fight scenes to make the chapter a bit more interesting and used it as an opportunity to show more qualities of each character. Originally, there really wasn't much dialogue during basic fight scenes. That was all added later when I wrote it. Natasha and Fyra really didn't have dialogue during Starter RP days. I just used them for an anonymous battle scene to give example of how I act characters. Which when it came to writing, I decided to make them speak a little and give kind of a foreshadow on the character's personality and traits associated with their past roles in other worlds. Natasha, being an assassin in the past, was carried on with her character in this universe of LOL. This is why she's so cold and reserved when Fyra hints of her job, something meant to be secret. The situation with Hycronum was an extra battle scene added to introduce Fyra's specialty move, since Lewa would soon share the same fate, though he was warned by Flame to be wary of the fire spin. This scene also offered more room for dialogue between Flame and Lewa, to better show their connection and relaxed friendship, like they've been best pals for quite some time, which they have. With the scene of Fiamma and Ashton fighting, I had a pretty fun time adding in pun-filled insults. In case you're wondering, I act both characters, which means the dialogue between these characters is solo, most of it written later once I'm done voice acting with secondary director. The last part of the fight where Ashton and Fiamma blast each other to opposing walls was part of the actual played sequence in 2010. This scene is one that I supposedly played so well that my friend could vividly imagine the intensity of the elemental blast, almost as though she was watching a movie, or so she claimed at the time. The detail of their bodies becoming so hot that they left melted footprints in the arena floor was an idea a secondary director pitched, feeling it would help relieve tension and be kind of funny, so I shrugged and went with it, then wrote that in. I'll also note that you will be seeing plenty of puns and such throughout LOL, since I naturally love adding them, and can't help but drop just a pinch of comical relief here and there. The battle scene between Fyra and Lewa didn't exist in 2010 playtime. This scene was added so Lewa won at least one match, unlike an original episode, where Lewa is straightaway pinned up against the Nimbus and loses. In this match of Fyra versus Lewa, I wrote it to be rather funny, a way to make Lewa's situation not so tense before the final battle. Then, once he wins by accident, we pan over to a scene between him and Flame. This scene also didn't exist during 2010 playtime, but was the extra notch of comedy needed, and was acted on the fly, just kind of happened. And I went with it. Later on we found this scene was perfect for connecting onto a new concept in the story that I'll speak of later in a future BTS chapter/podcast. The entire fight scene between Lewa and the Nimbus was small when played during 2010, and wasn't played at all during recording session as of today. My friend didn't know how the battle scene should go and felt Layla wouldn't say much, so I wrote the battle scene myself as I dreamt of it, and added in extra details that originally were ignored. I made the Nimbus use her hallucinogenic string pollen during battle, something that was never used originally. I felt that there should be an example of it being used, and just slipped it in the battle scene, since throughout most of LOL this pollen is rarely spoken of after episode 2. Trivia is that this string pollen is based off decorations I added to my Venimbus figurine's scythe, which later became part of her weapon line. More about her and her weapons will be for a later time. Closing scene of chapter 2 was an added part to the story as well. Originally there was no scene of Flame meeting Pohatu, who happens to be heading for the medical area. This scene connects on to second half of chapter 2, where we find out why Pohatu was heading for the medical area in the first place. As for the gift basket gig, that was just a filler idea, and added to make sense of why Flame was trying to follow Lewa to the medical area. During 2010 play, we skipped over little scenes like this, and kept our attention purely on Lewa.